Henry. So one little question before I begin, everyone. Does everybody know what this is? Put your hand up if you don't know what this is. Okay, there's one or two. So this is a Penrose tiling. It's very, well, a lot of us would say it's quite beautiful. And it's mathematically very interesting because it can tile the plane and have some amount of symmetry, but it has no translational symmetries. And now I'm going to show you what this talk is really about. So here we have a thing. You might see that this is not the same as what's on the left here. And now, okay, if you're okay with spending the next half hour listening to me talk about that. So, and firstly I'm going to talk about viruses and modular sculpture, i.e. origami. It's sort of a two-part talk. The second part is sort of more philosophical, and it's about motivation for this thing and the feeling and understanding of the mathematical idea and the difference between those two things. I'm going to talk about a little bit about biology though. So, what are living things made of? Cells. This is a cell. This is a cell that's infected with a virus. This is not the virus, but this is a sort of cloud of proteins that the virus has caused the cell to produce. If you were to leave this cell for a while, you'd find that it would become full of, oh, you can't see this so well, can everyone make out the little black things here? Yeah? It's sort of filled with these little black spots, and those are virus babies, so to speak, or full viruses really. Oh dear. Ah, yeah, sorry about that. And eventually the viruses fill up the cell so much that it bursts. These are all little viruses. Viruses are not cells, by the way. They're much smaller than cells. And these things become dispersed, and they collide with other cells. Those cells start replicating viruses again. It's a lot more complicated than that. There's a whole field, but this is really interesting. Certainly for the purposes of this thing. So here is a nice thing for those of you who like dodecahedrons. All of these are a bunch of pieces of plastic, and they are all pentagonal. They've all got some little magnets on them that allows them to fuse together when they collide. And all that's happening is that they're being shaken. Not too bad, right? In the first part of what I just showed you here, you've got a cloud of proteins. They're all separate from one another. They get shaken around in the environment of the cell, along with everything else in the cell, and they will spontaneously form these little spherical things. Those are called, those are the viruses. This sort of dodecahedron that you're seeing here, what you're thinking about here is the shell. There's some other stuff. There's other stuff going on with the virus, but yeah, the shell is a very important part. Okay. Here I've got two things that are each made out of 6 pieces. cube, coffee maker, I think. And I want you to imagine that I do the same exercise with these that you just saw with those little yellow pentagons. I attach magnets to all of these sort of edges where these things connect up, and then I put them both in bags. I put all of the squares in bags, and I put all of these things in bags, and I just shape them until they assemble. Which one is going to assemble first? Who reckons that the cube is going to, who would guess that the cube is going to assemble first? Most people. And who would guess that the coffee machine will assemble first? Nobody. Why do we think that the cube might assemble faster than the coffee machine?
Symmetry.
Symmetry, yeah. There's some combinatorial argument. And this is an evolutionary pressure for a virus. Viruses have evolved their proteins such that they are able to do this. Almost all of them have. Yeah, I think all of them. And this is quite similar in a way that appeals to me in a sort of sciencey art kind of way. It's very similar to a problem that we face in modular sculpture. And when I say modular sculpture, I mean when you're making something out of identical pieces. So this is a modular sculpture, this bit of origami. You can find this in origami books, and there's lots of other origami things like it. Does anybody recognize this? Does anybody know what kind of pattern this is? It's a giri tiling, which is it's a very cool Islamic art thing, and you have lots of little pieces and they fit together, and you're able to generate, without a whole lot of expertise, very, very beautiful things. And this is a Geodesic Dome. These were sort of popular in the 60s and 50s. Geodesic, probably a lot of you are familiar with these. They're very, very simple and fast to construct. Very, very fast indeed in comparison with other buildings, because they're simple to put together. You don't need a lot of training to do it. And this is kind of like this randomness, right? There's a reason that a virus and a modular sculptor might converge on the same thing. Like if you're writing a book of origami instructions for a kid to follow, you can't expect them to have a whole lot of sophistication. The nice thing about putting something like this in an origami book for kids is that all you need to say is, hey kid, the really pointy parts join in 5s, and the less pointy parts join in 3s. And the kid can make a nice thing like this. Let's start connecting this to the thing I showed you at the start though, the blue thing. So this is a particular virus. This is Hpv. Very, very nasty virus, kills hundreds of thousands of people across the world every year. It's not a dodecahedron. It's a bit more sophisticated. Most viruses are much more sophisticated than that dodecahedron. But it is made out of pentagons. If you were to stare at this for a while, you'd be like, well, each of these things is a cluster of 5. They are clusters of identical proteins. And I'm going to go through a little bit of an exercise. This is not the data that you get. The data that you get on a virus is like this. If I flick back and forth between these two things, maybe you can see the connection. So this is sort of an X-ray. This here, all I've done is I've taken that X-ray and I've increased the contrast on the image. And that has a nice effect. So you can see that these black dots, there are black dots on here already. Now we see only the black dots. And the nice thing about this is that each of these is the center of mass of one of the proteins, each dot. The proteins, you can still think of them as being like little things with magnets on them. And if we join up those proteins that have a connection to one another, we get this nice thing. And if we just take, this is sort of I guess you'd call it polyhedron. If we just colour in the faces, then we get this. And that is what you saw at the beginning. There are a large number of viruses These are the viruses that you can do that exercise with. You take their proteins, you look at the proteins' centre of mass, and you join up those proteins that are connected to one another, and you will get one of these nice tilings that I showed you at the beginning. So that each of these viruses can moderately easily evolve such that it might become like one of the others, which is useful. This is not the whole virus again, this is just the shell, but it's the same principle. And there is something, you can probably see, very Penrose-like about these tilings. You've got pentagons in them. Those of you who are familiar with the Penrose tilings, based on pentagons, and you get stuff like this. This is a rhombus with the same sort of angles as the rhombuses that you get in Penrose tiling. And they are sort of proposed as some kind of generalization of the Penrose tiling. And so it's a little bit of a dubious argument, because Penrose tilings are supposed to be aperiodic, and spheres are not aperiodic in some sense. You can go all the way around the sphere and get back to where you started, and that is in some sense a period. So there we can talk about the semantics, but it's kind of interesting to me how there are a bunch of things that are kind of claimed to be Penrose tilings, but it's at least a little bit controversial. The funny story about this is that Roger Penrose sued Kleenex for creating this toilet paper. I couldn't find out whether he was successfully sued. Does anybody happen to know? Huh?
He was.
He was successful. Well, fair enough almost. There again, this is a periodic tiling. So kind of defeats the point of having a Penrose tiling, I'd say. This is in the Darbi-Imam shrine in Iran. It's based on those Giri tiles that I mentioned earlier. Newspapers claim that it's Penrose tiling. The original paper on these tilings does not claim that they are Penrose tilings, but it makes in my opinion, I won't go into it, but it makes a pretty convincing argument that the people who made this were aware of something like the Penrose tiling. But it's controversial, especially in this community. So we've got a new addition to the dubious Penrose tilings, you might call them. As a little bit of an aside, the woman who came up with this model of viruses, she also presented a different kind of polyhedra. I didn't do any work on these because I was kind of interested in the biology, but I strongly these are beautiful tilings in my opinion, and they're just sort of sitting there in her papers. If you look, and it would be wonderful to see somebody in the British community pick these up and do something with them. There's a geometric problem that both viruses and human beings sort of converge on. Supposing you wanted to make a pattern that, in some sense, possibly some hand-wavy sense, scales on the sphere. Like you are a virus and you want to have proteins such that you can easily evolve to change your size. And that puts a constraint on the kind of pattern that you can have. The solution that they in general use to this is like Goldberg polyhedra or fullerenes. Those of you who are unfamiliar, essentially take a whole bunch of hexagons, you take 12 pentagons, you stick them together, and you can make a sphere of a certain size just by choosing the number of hexagons, and you also get nice icosahedral symmetry as well. And this was something that, it seems to me at least, motivated the design of geodesic domes. These were proposed by Buckminster Fuller, and he was able to sort of say, hey, you can make a geodesic dome of any size you like, you know. All you have to do is take away a few triangles or hexagons, however you prefer to think about it. The Konevitsova Tvarok tilings, which are these things that I'm talking about, these are just another solution to that problem. There's one last connection between these things and this modular sculpture that I'd like to talk about. Elongation is something that can happen in both. So what's wrong with this football?
It's not round.
It's not round.
Yeah.
It's too long. Yeah. But we got it spoiled for us. Why is it too long? What mistake was made when making this football?
Too many hexagons.
Too many hexagons, or to put it another way, this is a black hexagon. When you're making a football, you're supposed to have black hexagons and, black pentagons and white hexagons. And the rule is that you join hexagons together and you put in a pentagon. And at every point, you're supposed to have one pentagon and two hexagons. But somehow in the factory process, somebody accidentally made some black hexagons. And so, to think of it in another way, supposing you forgot about that rule about having all hexagon, hexagon, pentagon at every vertex, and you accidentally put in some white hexagons. If you started doing that, you might lose track of where you were and end up making a football of some weird size or length. This actually sort of happens to me, not with footballs. These are not mine, but I did something like this. I wanted to make a nice round, modular sculpture, a nice bit of modular origami, and I sort of lost track of where I was. I was like, okay, do I need to put an extra module here? Whatever. And I made a mistake, and I ended up making something more like this. Lost the pictures, but it's very analogous to what you see here. And the same thing happens with viruses sometimes. This is, in some sense, an Hpv virus. It's the one that I showed you earlier. But it is elongated for exactly the same reason. You had too many pentagons getting in at one place. And there are proposed medical treatments based on this. If you increase the amount of salt and you increase the amount of heat in the environment of a virus, they can accidentally form more of these things and less of the proper virus shells. That's quite an experiment. It's probably won't pan out, but quite interesting. Okay, and that's what I want to say about that. I want to say get a little bit wishy-washy now, a little bit philosophical. Because I work on interactive stuff, and I'm going to switch to this one. So this is an earlier version of this same thing, and it's sort of rotating automatically. If I click, this happens. And if I move my mouse around, you see that you get a maybe better insight into how these tilings are constructed. We're sort of taking just a dodecahedron and putting cut apart Penrose tilings on all its faces. The thing, 5 minutes, sure. The thing that I like about, I've never actually been to bridges before. But the thing that I like about bridges is that it seems to me that folks in this community are very well aware of how nice it is to think about how a mathematical object feels. It's very important. We take these mathematical objects, which might be just hidden in algebra or something like that, and we make them into images or sculptures, maybe even sounds, things that you can feel. our audiences often just come, I don't know if you guys get this, but people sometimes say, oh wow, that was just kind of trippy, or it was like a weird kaleidoscope or something like this, but they did experience the maths themselves. This is what motivates me to a very large extent. I might say to you that interactive stuff can emerge quite naturally from this goal. Sometimes things have to be interactive, so the space of these tilings, these spherical tilings I'm talking to you about, the space of them is two-dimensional, and the tilings themselves are at least two-dimensional. So if the space of them was one-dimensional, I could just show you an animation of like one of them growing into others. But if I were to do that, then you wouldn't see all of them. You can't do it as an animation. You have to give people the ability to explore. And a 2D space maps nicely to mouse control. That's the long view of this project here. But I want to show you something else as well, if I've got maybe 1 minute. Puzzles are important, and I experimented a bunch with different kinds of puzzle that you might have in a system like this. There's another one later on. This is sort of constructing a puzzle on the icosahedron. This one is harder to wrap your head around, but it is stretching stuff in a sort of two-dimensional mapping to a spherical quotient space, whatever thing. And so I will say feelings are important, but as teachers know, so are challenges or problem sets. You can give people a feeling for a mathematical object, but what you really want, if you want to get them using their head about it, then you have to give them some kind of challenge. And if you want them to think a specific set of thoughts, you have to craft those challenges quite carefully. If you're writing out a problem set for some course, then you want to push people in the direction of experimenting with your mathematical objects in the way that gets them towards the theorems, let's say, that you're interested in. And essentially there's an analogy between the mathematical artist community. You've got 2D quote, like something like this that we all know. We've got Craig Kaplan's Spin Draw, very interesting app here. These are things made by mathematical artists, us. And the same things have been explored by puzzle game designers. And they craft their challenges extremely well, and they get you to think about the mathematical objects in a very, very controlled and clever way that allows you to learn a huge amount in a short space of time. And so I strongly recommend looking into that. In particular, some of us here try to craft our challenges automatically, and I'd sort of recommend against that. And there's this interesting talk, How Do You Make an AI That Designs Video Games, by Jonathan Blow. It sort of gives you arguments for why essentially it's not enough to scramble a Rubik's Cube. What you'd prefer is a series of Rubik's Cube puzzles. And there's another talk that I did that goes into how you can craft challenges, how you might want to do that as a person making interactive mathematical art. This is called The Vow of Silence. You can search it on YouTube. And there I'll end. The thing that you saw, you can play with it at this website, viruspatterns.com. Thank you very much.
We have a few minutes for some questions.
Is there any theory that more spherical viruses as opposed to elongated viruses have some sort of selective advantage?
Yes. I mean, they will assemble faster. Sorry, is this on? Yeah. Okay. Hello? No. Yes, they assemble faster. They do. Viruses have a whole lot going on. This is biology for you. There are so many pressures that a organism filling a particular niche has to follow. So yeah, the spherical ones, which is about, I understand to be about 60% of all viruses in existence. By the way, viruses make up 90% of all organisms on this planet, so spherical viruses, they're everywhere. yeah, they do have selective advantage, but yeah, it'll depend on context, and there might be some reasons why they want to be elongated. T4, for example, has a very good reason to be elongated.
So you mentioned earlier that you have soccer ball pieces, and the only thing you know is that at each
The
vertex.
soccer ball, you mean the elongated thing?
No.
Oh.
Well, I mean, like ordinary, if you have like standard soccer ball pieces,
Yeah.
you mentioned that if all you know is that at every vertex a pentagon can touch two hexagons,
Mm-hmm.
then if you assemble according to that rule, you will end up with a bunch of completely standard identical soccer balls in different sizes.
Seems to me, at least.
Yeah. Can you also assemble at least some of these Pontus viruses using a similar local rule?
The procedure that they follow is quite interesting, and it's the thing that arguably gives them a strong connection to the Penrose tiling. I tried to investigate a bit whether there's some matching rule stuff going on, and it does talk. She does talk about that in her paper. Don't know how far the matching rule stuff goes, how far it goes, because it's I think pretty much. It's definitely going to be violated at the vertices of the dodecahedron, so to speak. So whatever matching rule you have in here, if it's anything like the Penrose tiling, it's going to be violated here for topological reasons. But yeah, we don't know. If you figure that out, then you can publish the paper from the biology journal.
Any other questions? If not, let's thank Hamish. And we'll start again in 3 minutes.